In this video, you're going to learn the difference in mindset of an entrepreneur versus an employee.
Now, when I graduated college, I was terrified. I no longer had the comfort of being in college, waiting to graduate. It's a pretty safe cocoon to be hiding in college, if you remember. But when I graduated, I failed 9 job interviews, and I had no real special skills anyone would pay for. I had a major crisis of meaning in my life. I started hacking together WordPress sites for real estate offices just to get by. I had no clue what I was doing. Well, what happened? I made the move from employee to entrepreneur without knowing what I was getting myself into. Now, what you're about to learn is what I wished I would have known when I got started.
When you make the move to entrepreneur, you can't look at this new world with the glasses of an employee. You have to try. Yeah, you can try, and it's not going to work. You have to try on a new perspective, even if what you're seeing doesn't really make sense. It will over time. So why is this important? As an entrepreneur, you're going to experience uncertainty like you never have before. The uncertainty that you experience will be almost constant in your day-to-day life. And this is terrifying because it goes against everything that we've been taught our entire lives as children. We've always been taught that we need to know the answers, and we need to know what the correct thing to do is. But when you understand the difference in the mindset of an entrepreneur versus the mindset of an employee, you'll start to see that this crazy uncertainty is totally normal and expected. And it's okay to not know what the answers are all the time. Here are a few things we've learned about being an entrepreneur versus being an employee. Entrepreneurs take full responsibility for their life. Employees, they might take responsibility for their life, but they're told what to do on a daily basis. They're told when to wake up, when they're able to eat, when they're able to leave, and how much money they get to make at the end of the day. The day that you wake up and realize that no one is going to take care of you but you is a very scary day. And it's terrifying because you have this moment where you realize you're responsible for everything in your life. You're creating everything. There's no one else to blame but you. And when you set out on this new path, if it weren't hard enough, every time that you get rejected or told no, the terror feels amplified a little bit.
Now, I was almost paralyzingly terrified for 6 months when I got started. 6 months, and it's not fun to feel terror for 6 months. Now, the terror went away for me, but only slowly. Now, the terror lessens as you get your first few positive customer interactions. But if you're like me, you usually get rejected like crazy before you ever get your first few positive interactions, which sucks. It took me like 6 months before I started getting positive interactions. But remember, with a positive interaction, the uncertainty only goes away for a moment and then it comes back. So learn to make uncertainty your friend. The next thing is having the answers versus not having the answers. Entrepreneurs, they really sit with questions. The employee panics when an answer is not known. So get comfortable with not knowing answers is what it really comes down to, which, like we said, goes against everything we've been taught as children. We always have to know the answer. We get an F on the test if we don't know the answer. We're not taught how to ask questions. So the next thing is the value economy versus the time economy. And entrepreneurs live in the value economy. So an entrepreneur, they create value once that can continue to work without them. But an employee, they actually are the value themselves. So when an employee, when they stop, the value stops, and subsequently the money also stops.
Yeah, on this, the value economy versus the time economy is really important because it's what dictates your income. Your income is directly tied to your time if you're an employee. There's no other way that you're able to make money aside from exchanging time, which is a really terrible way to live. Entrepreneurs, on the other hand, the income that they make is proportionate to the value that they're adding to the world. But if you try to be an entrepreneur and are focused on how much time you're putting into your business and that's the only measure, it's not going to work. You have to be focused on how much value are you adding to your customers' lives.
Yeah, there are instances in businesses where you could work for 1 hour and make $5 grand, $10 grand, because you understand how to create that kind of value in 1 hour. And I don't have any, I actually do have.
I used to do speaking events, and they would pay me $3,000 to come talk for an hour. Because there's that much value.
Yeah. And if you're like, it's good if you're in the same town, but even if you fly and stuff, that's kind of a lot of times. It's really not an hour, but it's still from value.
Yeah.
If for example, some of my best webinars, I've made like say $8,000 on a single webinar, and that took me like 4 hours to script, write, produce, promote, and actually conduct. So that was roughly $2,000 an hour for 4 hours. So there are ways, once you understand how to create value in ways like that. What's nice about software is software as a service. We're teaching you how to create that value that can live on without you. But while you're doing this, your emotional spectrum as an employee is like muted versus enhanced. So I would do it something like, you want to talk about this, Andy?
Yeah. Everything is amplified when you're an entrepreneur. When you're an employee, you can just kind of go in and punch the clock, and your days are relatively stable, and there are days where your boss pisses you off and you're frustrated. But when you're an entrepreneur, if you're an employee and your emotions kind of go like this, if you're an entrepreneur, your emotions go like this. And the highs that you experience are going to be greater than any high that you've had. And the lows are way more low, because you can be worried about your entire business collapsing. And if that happens, like, what's going to happen to you?
So come over here for a sec. And then, so if you can see this on camera, this is the employee. And this is their emotional experience. But the entire emotional experience of an entrepreneur is here. So when you're an employee, you're never really that happy. Maybe you are, but typically as an employee, you're not as happy and you're not as really afraid as the entrepreneur who has joy all the way over here and then shame and fear on this end. So if you have been an employee your whole life, then you step into the entrepreneurial arena and you move from this being your experience, and you actually think that this is actually the full experience. You're actually not aware that there's experiences out here. You come in as an employee, you come to an entrepreneur, and then all of a sudden you feel your first real dose of shame and fear at such an intense level that it causes you to panic, that you want to jump back into this experience because it feels safe. Don't do that. Stay here and just realize that the entrepreneur's the emotional experience is completely a giant pendulum. So do you have anything to add?
Yeah. The piece around this is that the quality of your life is directly proportional to the level of uncertainty that you can handle. So if you're living life in this box, there's not a whole lot of uncertainty with it. And so you can live a pretty comfortable life, but you just won't feel alive with everything. And so the more that you expand this way, the more uncertainty that's going to come with it, but also the more excitement and the more fun and the more joy, but also the more fear that you're going to experience.
Yeah, now my most successful software business, Paperless Pipeline, when I started it, I was irrationally uncertain. It was terrible. And I remember being so afraid because there were 8 competitors in the space. I was like, how am I ever going to compete with all these guys? But I stuck with it. I stuck with the uncertainty. And now it's been the most richly rewarding business that I have.
So, uncertainty versus constant stability or certainty. As an entrepreneur, you're going to face a lot more uncertainty almost daily.
Now, as an entrepreneur, you have to learn, like we said, to sit with questions to find and not sit with answers. Like you as an entrepreneur, you learn to ask questions to get the answers. Now, if you've been an employee your whole life, this next point Andy's going to make is probably a little bit more difficult because you don't actually know how to ask the right questions.
Yeah, maybe. I think as an entrepreneur, you begin to realize that the quality of the questions that you ask are the quality of the answers that you're going to get in return. And so a lot of people get hung up asking the wrong questions when they're employees. And when you're an entrepreneur, so let's just make this really tangible. If you're stuck doing idea extraction and you ask, why can't I find an idea? It's asking that question isn't going to pull you down to like a clear road to make changes from. But if you ask yourself the question, where do I avoid digging deeper with the questions on my idea extraction calls because I feel uncomfortable. That will lead you to gold. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Perfect.
And if it doesn't now, it will later down the line.
When you're making your calls. So the quality of questions that you ask are going to lead you to the quality of answers that you're going to get. Entrepreneurs understand how to ask really, really great questions. And what we've noticed is if we're stuck with something and we're going back and forth on a topic, we won't go back and forth anymore. What we'll do is we'll shift the question that we're asking and see what path that leads us down.
When we came up with the phrase starting from nothing for the Foundation podcast, that was a very stressful hour and a half. We were about ready to give up. And then one of us asked a question like, well, how can we accurately describe how an entrepreneur that can start a business if they don't have an idea, if they don't have money, if they don't have credibility? How can we accurately describe that? And then starting from nothing came from, I don't remember exactly, but
when we did the contest to launch the promotion of our launch this year, we gave the contest away where we gave away Dane's business partnership for a year. How that came is we were in an RV to Burning Man, and we had spent a day or two talking back and forth about what are we going to do. We could give cash or iPads or whatever, and we're talking about giving business book summaries and giving away a library or something. And then I was like, what is the coolest thing we can give away where people are like, holy shit, like this is the coolest contest I've ever seen. And that expanded our minds to think of like, Dane's like, well, what if I gave away a business? And it was just like, boom, that was it. And it came from asking the right question. After hearing the above, what is the toughest shift that you're going to have to make in your mindset? Or if you're already a successful entrepreneur going through this program, what is the toughest shift that you've already made from transitioning from employee to entrepreneur? So just going over them again, taking full responsibility for your life versus having somebody else tell you what to do, where to be, when to go places. Constant uncertainty versus experiencing certainty on a day-to-day basis. Living in the value economy versus living in the time economy. And the the emotional spectrum of living in a world where your emotions are amplified to a great amount. Which one of these will be the toughest shift that you believe you'll have to make? Go ahead and post in the comments below before moving on.